Our last one, our last newbie. Sarah just got her haircut, right? I feel like there was a Facebook post about that. I think that's how I posted, like I just cut my hair. Obviously another one of my students. I'm not just meeting people on the internet and inviting them down here. The live, yeah. Nothing about my introduction suggests
what about JD?
Except for like Curbside I met online. Like actually everybody I met online except for Trey. Sarah, second-year master's student at Ball State, where she studies journalism. She has an amazing final project too that she should ask her about at some point. Also got her undergraduate at Ball State in journalism, and she's part of the Invictus Writers 4 project. And she is also going to be telling a story from her as yet untitled memoir piece, which hopefully is through Act 2 at this point, since we have a meeting this week. So welcome Sara Nahrwold to the stage.
All right, so how do you start a letter to your parents telling them that you want to kill yourself? Dear Mom and Dad? Because that's how I started my letter to my parents. I was about 15 years old and I was in my room. I hand wrote back then, didn't have a laptop. Looking back, I probably should have typed it on the home computer. My handwriting is atrocious, it still is. Probably with age, I think it still gets worse. So I sat there and wrote this letter out to my parents. And I even signed it as if they didn't know who was writing this letter to them. I put it in an envelope too, like I was going to send it. Didn't stand it in the bag. And with the envelope, I like to lick envelopes. I think they taste delicious. They're a good one. And I walked out to my mom. She was in the kitchen doing the dishes, and I said, I want you to read this after I go to bed. I didn't want to see your face. Who would want to see your parents' face when they're reading a letter about you wanting to kill yourself? I didn't want to do that. So I gave her the letter. I went to bed. Probably didn't sleep that well that night, looking back. So she went into my dad's room and said, hey, Mike, that's my dad. I need to tell you something. And I was like, okay, what? Puts down the paper. And she's like, Sarah wrote this letter to us. And I'm going to read it. So she read it to him. Dear Mom and Dad. They sat there for a while, both of them kind of talking, thinking by themselves, trying to figure out what to say. Now my mom, she has a pretty good idea about me. I am one of those people, I kind of wear my feelings on my sleeve, so she kind of knew something like this was coming. Probably not to that extent, but she knew something was coming. Up to that point, I had a lot of weight issues. I always talked about my weight to my mom, and she knew a lot about that. My dad, no idea. I don't know if it was because I'm a teenage girl, and I know I didn't talk to my dad about those things, and he was completely blindsided. He had no idea. And at first, he was really angry about it when he's talking to my mom. How can she think she's fat? That's the biggest thing with my dad and I, have always been the weight issues. He's always told me how fit I am, how athletic I am, and it's never been a fat thing. I mean, maybe when I was about 6 months old, and my parents always tell me they could never snap the onesie in between my thighs because they're kind of probably the only time that they had considered that. So they're talking, trying to figure out what to do with this letter that I had written to them. In it, I detailed how I hated myself, how I had hurt myself, I had started self-abusing, how I tried to starve myself, and ultimately I wanted to end my life. And they started talking about maybe counseling. But as they went on, they both kind of realized they didn't know where to start, who to talk to, and quite frankly, they didn't really know how that would look for them. I'm from a small town, things get out. My mom told me this story this summer, actually, when I was working on my Invictus project, so I didn't know this conversation had ever taken place until then. And when she told me this, I got angry with her. I mean, come on, your kid just wrote you a letter that she wanted to kill herself, and you're worried about how other people are going to think? But then again, when I look back about this part in my life, I had never considered counseling either. I hadn't thought of that as a thing. I just thought this was what I wanted to do and just in my life. So by the end of the evening of their talk, they kind of decided something simple. Just be positive with me. Say that I'm looking good, say I'm doing great in my sports, and definitely not compare me to my friends. I had a lot of friends, I still do, who are real thin, just naturally thin, and that was never me. I have a bigger bone structure. And so that's kind of what they decided. Well, the next night, my mom comes into my room, knocks on the door to talk to me. I knew she was going to talk to me. Obviously, I wrote her this letter. I didn't know it was going to be the next night. I'm kind of glad she did, so I wasn't waiting for days. But then again, like, shit, she's knocking on my door. She wants to talk about this letter. And you know the, hey, we need to talk. We need to talk. Everybody knows that's bad. That's all never good. We need to talk. Nobody wants to hear that. So she sat down on my bed and we started to talk. And again, like my dad, at first she was kind of mad. She was mad because she thought I'd blown this whole thing out of proportion, the weight issue, and she felt like it was just it had gone too far. And she told me, and I'll never forget, and I still always remember what she said. She said, Sarah, killing yourself would be the most selfish thing you could do. Selfish? It didn't even cross my mind. How's that selfish? I thought it was very unselfish. I was going to do that, and it was going to be great, and I would be done, and I wouldn't have to deal with it anymore. How could this be selfish? Well, I was a 15-year-old female. I didn't know what selfish meant. And so, but then as I have gone on through the years and thought more about it, I've realized that she was right. At doing that, I never had thought, if I did that, how my parents would feel. Like, they probably would have lived with that, obviously, the rest of their lives. Would they have felt guilt, like they didn't do enough for me, regret that they said something or did something that maybe they shouldn't do? And that was the first time in my life that I really realized what I was doing to myself actually affected more than just me. Because up until that point, it had been all about me. I hadn't really talked about the whole issue, and I had just focused on myself, and I didn't think about what this could be to my parents. So of course we talked, we cried. She didn't yell at me anymore. That was just the beginning part. I've never cried so much with my mom in my life ever again since then. So that night I kind of learned that, being fat and being upset wasn't a good enough reason to die. And my mom taught me that, and for that I will definitely be grateful. And anyway, so we had our talk and went on, and after that, you hope that things change. You hope that something like that is a red flag for all of us, that, hey, life isn't that bad where you have to do something like that. Life isn't bad enough where you need to write your parents a letter at 15 because life is so hard, because it never was. But in my mind, it was the worst thing, the worst part of my life. And so after we had that talk, what do you think happened after that? I still hated myself. I still hurt myself. And I still tried to starve myself. That talk didn't change that. What did change, however, was that they knew. They had an idea before. My dad, completely clueless, and I don't blame him for that. They had an idea of what was going on, but they had no idea that it was to that extent. So they knew, and they really knew by that point. So I was still doing the same things I was doing before. That had not changed. What did change, however, was that letter. That letter changed the relationship I had with my parents forever. If I hadn't written that letter, I don't know if I would have done what I said I wanted to do, or if my relationship would have ever changed. Because I wrote that letter. Because I sat there in my room at 15 years old and said, "Dear Mom and Dad."
They're not allowed to write happy stories in my writing. There's one, in 4 years, I think I have 22 stories and only one is happy. Nobody wants to read happy in my world. And my wife knows every movie that we watch, I have to start it with like, oh, by the way, like everybody fucking died. This love that you see, it's not real. It's real.
All crashing down at any
Everything,
moment.
yeah. Now, like, and I didn't realize that about myself until I got married. And now I'm like, I make all my students write horrible shit. Like, everything I do is horrible.
7.
6.
All right, let's thank the newbies for coming up here. They're all working these stories, so it's hard to work your stories out in public. If you care, the first Monday of the month, I'll be working out my new book here at Indie Word Lab, which is put on by Metonymy Media. Every Monday, the first Monday of every month, they have a word lab where the author comes in and reads, and then there's a writing exercise. It's a group exercise. So I'll be talking about alcoholism, fun shit, and my family who are hillbillies who killed a bunch of people. So you can come out and find out all about those kinds of things. Yeah, it's totally amazing. My family is out of control. 300 years of out of control crazy.